is ancestral lineage healing?
I think the lineage part of it is important. So this idea that, we are from different lineages of people. There are bodies who have come before us. There are wombs that we have moved through one after another, like in a line. And so that's kind of like the lineage piece of it. And the healing part of it is about recognizing that there are those who have come before us, who have died, who have lived and died, who may still be in some state of um, disruption, may not be fully integrated, fully crossed from this world. Like there's a lot of ways to describe that. There's a lot of like frameworks to view that through, but the basic understanding that not all of those who have died may be totally good. Some of them may be in real need of support. Some of them may be actively causing trouble and harm in our own lives. Like we are on the receiving end of everything upstream of us. So whether those are blessings or burdens or troubled behaviors or family patterns or whatever, that there's actually a need to turn around and face that. But the strategy of doing that in an effective way that's like safe for us and in like a non-heroic, non-martyry way is to not think that ourselves as the children, like the ones who are living, playing the game of life, that it's actually on us to handle or deal with everything upstream of us. Like it's actually not within our capacity to do that. It's not even our job. It's not actually even our proper job. So the lineage healing piece means turning to and like facing what needs to be faced amongst the dead who may be troubled in one way or another, or may have resources in one way or another, and to make connection between ourselves as the living children and much, much older ancestors, like the elders amongst our own ancestors, who were living at a time that still had intact traditions, were still taking care and revering their own ancestors, were still in a right relationship with the land and the waters of the places that they were living. And not to say that there's like some sort of like, you know, perfect time in the past, but that the people were handling things. Things were being dealt with and weren't accumulating and like being passed on downstream, landing on us. So the strategy of this is a partnership between ourselves as the living and those much, much older ancestors. And it's a relationship with those ones. So rather than what a lot of people think about when they think about working with ancestors, they think about like a grandparent or someone who's like beloved or known to them, and working with them directly. And this approach is a bit different because it's like, yeah, you know, maybe you really had a great relationship with that person who's passed, but they may not be in a state to really be supportive of you. They actually may be in a state of need themselves. So rather than like trying to lean on the more recent dead who might be fragile in some way, it's like don't grab onto that rickety stick that's like dying from the same rot that you are. How about the tree that's got like full roots and like strong and present and there? It's just like that's what you anchor into. So that's the idea about stretching back to working with those much, much older dead. And then they carry the spirit end of the work. They know a thing or two about being dead. I don't. So working with them to do the piece that's theirs and then empowering that process through relationship, through doing what human beings can do, which are singing the songs and making the food and going on the pilgrimages and like doing the research and learning the names and all, making the offerings, all the things that we are here to do. So that's what I that's my understanding of what this work is to bring all those dead that are in between, that are in need of support in some way, into an elevated state of well-being so that they can be integrated into that lineage that of truly elevated ancestors with a capital A, so that there are no dead behind us who have been untended, and that we are well prepared to die ourselves.
What drew you personally to ancestral work?
Mm. Yeah, I have a good story about this, so I'm glad you asked this. I I hadn't really seriously put a lot of focus in this direction until I went to Standing Rock in North Dakota a couple of years ago. During the high point of the protests there, and felt really nervous and unsure about what my role would be there and how to actually be supportive and not be in the way. And knew that I had been in an interior way doing spirit work, but without particular training or guidance. I didn't really know what I was up to. Didn't feel like it was, didn't feel very valid or qualified in any way. But at some point while I was there, I asked for a dream. I asked for a dream, and I got a dream. And the short end of it being is that I was tested. I was tested by the ancestors of the land of that place that were like, okay, you want to show up? You want to move some things? You want to join this battle in some way? Well, let's see what you got. And I absolutely failed in like a putter of sniveling tears. Like I in the dream was presented with challenges, and I could not call on anyone to come and help. Like I tried to call for my own mother to come, and she wouldn't come, and all I could feel was this sort of like like shaking of the head behind me, being like, if you can't even bring those ones who are closest to you to come and support, then this is not a job for you. You are not ready. And I felt like a real smackdown from that, and I took that with me, and I really started chewing on that. I'm like, how do I even do that? Like, how do I even go about doing that? And like, what came up was unresolved stuff with my own mother, things that I thought I might be able to get out of this lifetime without actually having to confront and deal with. And uh, I was aware that the struggles that I have had personally in my own lifetime are reflective of very, very old patterns of trouble, and that they went back much further beyond, those memories of and stories and names of the people that I have. And so I started, scouring the world for people to study with, and ways to engage in this and actually do that. And so that has been a great gift to me. That harsh teaching has come back around to be so fruitful in my own life. Um, and I've even had the experience of being able to be in contact with that one that came up for me in that dream, and to be like, thank you. I mean, thank you for pointing me in that direction. And she told me again, she's like, it just gave you back to your people. And I'm like, I'm like, yeah, maybe you can't get all the white settlers to return to Europe, but you can return them to their ancestors. And so that was a great gift. It was a great gift.
So I grew up on the ancestral land of my people, but uh, I wouldn't have termed it that until recently. Uh, and when my grandmother died 20 years ago, I was with her when she died, and that was felt like a initiation in terms of even just spiritually and sort of dealing with like death, and even just thinking about the ancestors and things. And so my work in then has gone on to do with um, creating spaces for people to remember their dead and their ancestors in a cemetery in Vancouver as part of the artist residency. And as I was doing that more and more, I realized how little I knew. So in terms of like ritually and what was really happening in terms of like with the dead, and people coming to me and asking for sort of help and not having any clue. and thinking, oh my God, like people think that I know something and I don't, and this is really terrifying. And so when I heard of Daniel's work, I wasn't particularly looking for anybody, but I saw him, and I started to listen to his talks and did a course with him, and it really shifted how I saw things because a little bit prior to that, I had also been going down the route. I believe the ancestors had already been calling me because I had gone to um, to go to some of the grave sites of ancestors and part of the family that I never grew up with. I never knew my father's side of the family. I never grew up with him, so um, there was a lot of different things sort of happened. But in retrospect, it was like I feel like the ancestors were kind of gently pushing me towards this work and seeing how the work can for myself, like somebody who doesn't have who didn't have a background in any kind of like spiritual, not spiritual, any like kind of psychic work or work that was kind of like more direct, other than like with plant spirits. Um, it's been kind of huge in terms of realizing that it's a capacity that everybody has. It's something that is actually our birthright that has been taken away by a whole bunch of harms and problems throughout history. And so I sort of feel like it's kind of almost like a moral obligation to do this work and to feel it and to understand it and to share it. It's because it's really normal.
This is like cleanup work we're doing. We're like handling untended business, but it's not endless, you know? It's actually a fairly short period of time in terms of like human history that we have been um, separated from our ancestral lands or traditions or rituals. And um, it's very confirming to be involved in this and learn that it's not lost, and maybe not even possible that it can be lost. Um, Although there's a lot to grieve in it, in the process of like reweaving, bringing these pieces back together. I think that, when people ask about what are the practical benefits of this kind of work, that is, um, that's one of the big ones right there, um, is that feeling of um, visceral blood and bone connection to that really, really long line of people who have come before us, and that sense of lineage. Like, so many of us are just so cut off, or whether it's because of harms that have been done that we've experienced in our own lifetime, or just like uh, literally being severed from land or traditions or all of that. And that, like, my experience is that in my own lifetime, I am finally in a place of enough safety and privilege and time and capacity that I can turn back around and like take responsibility for tending so many of those that went untended for so long. And it's kind of like I'm lucky. I feel so lucky to be able to have a role like that, to be blessed to be in a position like that. But I also understand that there's a reason that things go untended, that rituals for the dead are not performed, and how that can snowball over time. It's like terrible things go down and you have to handle like the day-to-day survival piece. But if that goes on for too long, and then people are too separated or too, you know you're so depleted or so distant or have lost language, like all the reasons, all the things that build up over time, that I'm finally like the generation that's able to turn back around and say, yeah, I've got the capacity and the will and the understanding and the resources and the curiosity, and let's do this.
The accessibility and the blessings and the knowledge that can come through uh, is astounding in terms of the connections and what we can learn, what we're told. by the ancestors and shown in terms of visuals or feelings or um, sensing. There's um, the capacity to suddenly see these things and look at the culture that we live in a different way, and to be able to access um, historical information uh, um, through like googling and things, but suddenly seeing it from a different lens,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that it, it is still within us. It has to be, because we are the blood and bones of the ancestors.
We are here. We are here. We're the children, you know? Children of those who have survived everything, you know? That's um, it's awe-inspiring and a lot of responsibility, you
Yes.
know?
When I was doing some Buddhist studies, that there's a thing about we're in this human body at this time, and so it's a responsibility and a blessing to be able to do the work of enlighten, trying to become enlightened, or understanding things. And um, I never really quite got that till I started to do the work with the ancestors, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, I see. It's not just a blessing from some sort of spirit out there that I'm here. It's actually because of the tenacity and the incredible hard work, and it just the fact that anybody survived and that I'm here is kind of amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
what a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shifts things in a lot of ways, from feeling sort of outside of the culture maybe, or outside of um, not if especially having grown up in a family that, wasn't particularly functioning well, or small, it was a very small family, and no external uh, relatives and things. So it's just sort of suddenly feeling like, oh, there is this massive, actually, extended family. There's this massive,
Right. Right.
and there's going to be people in that lineage that I'm going to really resonate with,
Mm-hmm.
even if my actual blood family who are alive right now, I don't. What do you mean by ancestor? And on the other is like, why the focus on blood and bone ancestor?
That really snagged me when I first was exploring this. I was like, oh, but my ancestors are the mountains, and my ancestors are the river, and my ancestors are the trees, and my ancestors the soil, and the animals, and the other creatures, and all these things. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but there's a level of relatedness. Like I came through the body of my mother, you know, like I look like her. I have um, pain that came through her. I have um, gifts and skills that she's taught me, you know. And so there's something about starting with what is closest to you, and on a body level, you know, we are our closest relatives are human beings, you know, in that way. We have lots of other relatives. Our bodies are built from many places and many foods and all the things that we do. Um, we've got, you know, maybe spiritual lineage ancestors if there's a particular tradition that we follow. And I understand that the gifts of those being parts of those different kinds of lineages. But there's something really particular and precious about turning back to those ones who, you know, whose bodies we actually came through, and how, especially with ancestrally related troubles that have to do with like physical ailments and things like that, like it seems like it's the most direct route. And um there's more kind of familiarity there. I mean, family familiarity, relatedness, you know, we talk about relatives and like degrees of relationship. And so it's again, it's starting with what's closest to us and then moving out from there. So, you know, I've come to learn from some of my own ancestors about like affinities and relationships with other sorts of animals that I didn't realize were ancestral. You know, I thought this was my own personal connection with a thing. And like, no, olive trees have built our bodies for how many generations? Okay. And to have that um, understanding land in my mouth when I eat an olive or I cook my food in olive oil, and that it's not just about me. And it's about a long, long history of relationship that goes far beyond my own personal lived experience. The gravity of that and the potency of that is exponentially greater. So I think that there are a lot of reasons why it's more comfortable for people to work with non-blood ancestors. And I get that, and that's been my story as well. And that was part of what my kind of like calling to do this work was about. It was like, yeah, in that dream that I described earlier, if you can't get your own people to back you up when you need it, why do you think you're here? What do you think you're even doing? Who do you think you are? I didn't know, you know. And now I know a little more, and I know who my people are a little more, and I know how to call them, and I know how to take care of them, and they take care of me. And the potency that comes along with that, and the protection that comes along with that um, is cannot be undersold. So don't be afraid of it. I guess would be my message to people. There's a lot of ways to work in these like more distant realms of connectivity, and it's not that those are not valid. Um, we are star beings as well. We are from star stuff on a physical level and not just a spiritual level. That's there too. But there's something about turning to who's nearest and dearest, and working with those ones that is tender and potent and scary, and where there's a lot of potential, like a lot of untapped potential for healing.
It's not just your genealogy and your DNA, although that is an interesting part that can sometimes reveal things, but uh, it's actually having a relationship, because the DNA is like learning facts and things, which I love. Like I'm like kind of go down those like neurodivergent paths, but it's like the actually having a relationship and you know making an offering and or eating certain foods because I can feel that that's there's a connection, and I suddenly feel like, oh, I can eat some sepia pasta, and that I would not normally be drawn to eat, but it's like that's the food of some of my ancestors. So when I eat it, it feels different. There's a
Yeah.
different sensation in the body, and a, a resonance, like an echo in time or something. It's a on a visceral level that's quite interesting. I guess for me, the thing that's interesting about it is it takes it out of also a specific story of, um, say, for instance, my ancestors from Italy who were in the part of Croatia that was in the war, and there's a lot of troubles there, and so it's rather than me looking at one specific time period and going, this is who they were at that time period. It's I'm not looking at that. I'm connecting with a guide that's way way older, and there's a whole bunch of things that could have happened and did happen and that I don't even necessarily know about that created uh, so um, so that the whole lineage has the capacity to heal rather than it, and I don't have to understand it.
Right.
I don't have to personally know all of the histories. I don't have to know the names of all of those ancestors because we're going back as far as we need to,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we have this massive lineage that goes back like thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Like the body of well-being behind us is so great compared to, even 5,000 years of disruption, you know? That's not that long a time in the course of human history.
The further back I keep looking, even just historically, the more um, the more global the
Mm,
ancestors become,
right.
the more interconnected we all become, the more everybody, all my relations. It's very interesting to suddenly have that not only as a sort of a political idea, but to actually start to feel it on
Mm-hmm.
a visceral level and realize that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
quite, it just shifts a whole lot of previous mindsets for me. And as a practitioner, when you're working with somebody, how are you working with helping somebody to do the lineage repair work?
Well, if somebody is up for that, because it does take some dedication and it does take some time, um, the intent with this is not for myself as a practitioner to be in the role like a mediumship role. It's like I'm not going and talking to your dead people and then reporting back, like that's a thing, people can do that. Like I could do that, but it's ultimately, I don't feel that that is the most empowering way forward. What's really the thing that brings healing to people's lives and like keeps that is like it's like rebuilding that relationship. So it's kind of like helping people be reintroduced to their own ancestors. And so there's a ritual process and there are steps and there are ways of going about that. But a lot of it is just sort of like showing that that's possible and like having some strangely kind of like linear steps to get from where we are now back into relationships. So it's such a non-linear and strange process, but it helps to have a little bit of a framework for that. So it really is just about getting people to be reconnected with their own ancestors, learning how to listen to them, work with them, have boundaries with the ones that you need to have boundaries with, and to be able to like really receive blessings from those who are able to give them. And that's a relationship that people walk with, go forward into their life with, and they don't need me to be there in between. So as a practitioner, my role is more to hold a prayer around the process to help people with like those steps along the way. But it's not like guided um, meditation where I'm like, oh, you see a tree and then you go 4 steps to the right and you do this and you see this. It's being in a witness role, it's being in a prayer role, it's being in the role as like a recorder and a scribe, so that people can really drop into their own experience and not have to be up in their intellectual mind trying to figure out, oh, what does this mean that I saw a tree, or I trying to figure it out, or trying to remember. So I write down what's happening for people and I'm asking them to report what's happening for them, and like helping them navigate a bit as like confusing things come up, or things that are like really emotionally charged, or like when is it safe to move into something. And it is a little bit like learning a new language, but it's totally doable. Everybody does this in their own way, um, and it's really possible for most people. It helps to have someone else just model that, and so a lot of that is, I think, what we do on the practitioner end.
Once people have made the connection and um, the lineage repair is in process, is it something that then people can do on their own? Like, is it something that they have to keep having a practitioner involved with?
Ideally, it is something that you can do on your own, and but people like different levels of support. I still, you know, what do I say? I love having other people hold space and sessions for me to do this. It's a relief to have support, and um, so I think of it as that. It's like support as needed. There are a few things early on in the process about like there's a couple kind of foundational pieces that really need to be there. Like sorting out how to be in connection with a guide, an ancestral guide on the lineage that you're working with. And then that one is really sort of driving the process. You can go right to your own guide for direction about how to proceed with the healing that needs to be done. So, so ultimately, I hope that I wouldn't be needed or need to be an intermediary in any way. And so there's a lot of encouragement for people to work with this on their own. But it's like, you do have to learn some skills along the way, and like learn some things about ritual safety. A lot of it has to do with um, kind of the balance between uh, having strong boundaries and learning to have things like energetic sovereignty, which that some people might be like, what the heck does that mean? But just being able to claim your space and like have your will, and and say this is mine, and this is how far I'm willing to go, and this is how far you can come, and like being able to say yes or no to that kind of contact. um, yeah, there's a lot of emphasis on just kind of blasting open all your senses, and people want to, be more psychic, or they want to have a lot of visions, or they want to have a lot of dreams, and that's well and good, but there's an equivalent need to be able to say no, just as there is to be able to say yes, and being able to manage that and moderate that and have that be like sustainable, so that you can just go about your life, and not be terrified by things that might seem strange. So there is um, there's there is like some of those skills that are woven into doing this, just so that you can do it well and safely. um, but yeah, I would really hope that people just take these relationships and go with them, because they belong to them.
And if somebody is really interested, but they haven't ever done any sort of grounding, they don't even necessarily know what that means in terms of and boundaries. Like it's
Yeah.
language is sort of like, what does that mean exactly?
The boundaries piece, like, we talk about that with living people all the time. Like, you can get an immediate sense if someone is feels like really safe. Sometimes you meet someone and you don't know them at all, and you're like, hey, I would trust you to watch my laptop or my baby or my purse or something. Like, I get a good feeling from you. Okay, I'm gonna let you in a little bit. There are living people that you meet that you're not so sure about. They maybe are not really showing who they are. And you figure they're probably decent people, but you don't know. Eh, maybe you want to keep a distance from them. Maybe you're not going to give them your credit card number or whatever, some kind of intimate contact or access to you. And then there are people that, from across the street are in some kind of turmoil, and you're like, I don't want to even make eye contact with that person. I don't want them to even see that I'm here. I'm gonna not put my energy in that direction. I'm not going to interact. I'm not going to look, nothing, you know? So we already know what it means to have energetic boundaries in our interaction, just in the world. And it's not different in the spirit world, the unseen world, realm of the ancestor, whatever you want to call it. It's the same. It's the same. It's knowing when you're saying yes, knowing when you're saying no, being clear about it, and drawing a line. Some people in some traditions draw a line or a circle of salt or whatever it is. It's like there are a lot of ways um, to demonstrate the boundaries that you have set. But the most important piece is what you're saying here. There's no faking this stuff. Like, it has to really originate um, from some clarity of intent within yourself. And so that's mostly what that is. And it only gets um, stronger and more practiced over time. I'm not perfect about that. I'm still working on doing that. And one of the ways that that your boundaries are being violated is that, like, if you were starting to experience really disruptive things happening in your life, and that's often one of the reasons that people get interested in doing this, is they're having some kind of harmful ancestral influence that's like boundary crossing or in their dreams or like playing out in their lives in some way that's harmful, and they want to learn to establish a boundary. But the boundary piece is only part of it, and it can be exhausting to kind of keep those walls up all the time, to be like, nobody see me all the time. That is can be isolating, and it can be really exhausting. So there's some steps beyond that, and techniques beyond that, in terms of being able to invite in supportive energies to help hold that on your behalf, to help come in and be kind of like a layer of protection around you that are going to stand between you and any of those troubled influences. And there's also this piece about boundaries not necessarily needing to be like this opaque brick wall. I mean, sometimes you need a brick wall, but sometimes people's boundaries are so strong that it prevents them from having any kind of contact, or feeling like they don't have these skills of perception that we've been talking about. They're like, oh, I don't have any vision. It's all, I'm cut off from all this stuff. I talk to these ones and no one ever talks back. And part of the reason that can happen is because we're so protected. So there's a permeability piece about that, and there's a consent piece about that. And so that's the piece about, like, if you have sovereignty, then you're in a position to say yes or no, you're invited, you're not invited, and to be able to you know to show up with your own intentions and will, and be clear about that.
That's good.
And the grounded piece, I mean, I don't want to say it's easy, because I struggle with that sometimes too myself. But I'm just, as I'm saying this, I'm wiggling my toes on the floor and kind of giggling to myself. It's right there. Gravity has got you, the earth has got you, and a lot of that is just about like deepening into and feeling and remembering, that we are not just these individual beings and bodies. We are the body of the earth. We are these extensions of the body of the earth. And so being able to like lean back into that, or lean back into those things that are bigger than our individual selves, that's what the grounding piece is. It's just like, I am here, and I'm not so small, like I am of something greater, and it's got me and always will. I'm never not in contact with the earth. So doing that, and doing that through your body, that's the easiest route, I think, for most people. And it's not always through your feet. Like, the client recently was um, really struggling with feeling out of her own body, not really even being able to feel certain parts of her body. And she's like, I can't get grounded, because everything I read is like, you have to do this with your feet. And like, you can do this with your eyelash. You can do it with your fingernail. Any part of you that can touch something greater, you can put a root down there. You can put a root down anywhere. So start with what you've got, and then you build on it. I really appreciate like a lighthearted sense of humor around this bit. We are so like driven by belief, having to commit to a side, to pick a thing, to stick to it, to be immovable about it, to like be sure. And how are we sure in world of fake news and truth? What's true? These are getting at some like deep existential stuff. And I think that one of the pieces about engaging in this kind of work is you don't have to believe in it. You don't have to believe in anything. You go ahead and imagine everything. You go ahead and dream it all up. What's important is your own direct experience. So there's a real focus on subjective experience here, and not like a sense of objective truth. Although it is freaking fantastic when you have experiences that come up in these states of connectivity, or that you might be in a really receptive state and you're getting images or stories or guidance or connection with your ancestors, And then, lo and behold, you have some confirming experience in the material world that's just lines up so perfectly. And you're like, oh, it's real. I can't pretend that it's not, you know? And so um, that's enough to keep me going. I mean, I'm a scientist as well. Like, I don't set that aside. I think they are compatible ways of being. But what I really realized when I was first doing, guiding sessions with people, there's a lot of concern about, am I making it up and am I imagining? And I feel like at least when you're starting this, um, it's fine to err on the side of imagining more. Like, if you're not going to be perfect and figure it all out and know what everything means, or be able to look it up in a book, um, you really have to trust your own experience a bit, and that takes building some confidence, and it takes having some of these like confirming type of experiences that I've described for yourself, you know so like it's not something that I'm going to tell you and then you have to believe in the thing. What I hope is that I can be a trustworthy person enough that someone feels that they can relax enough to really be in it when they're in it, and to receive what they receive. Like, for example, for myself, when I first attempted to do this kind of ancestral connection stuff, and I went to a 3-day workshop, and everyone in the room is reporting these like wild, like narrative visionary things, and these old grandmothers serving them tea and all this stuff, and I'm just like, I'm doing it wrong. All I feel is like this like weird like electrical sizzle in my cheekbone. That was all I was getting. Like, that was all that could like get through this, because like my filters, my perception filters were so strong that like I wasn't even feeling like I was able to receive, but I could feel something in my cheek. And I could I could try to rationalize what that was or wasn't, or I could feel it because it was what was happening. And I could turn to that and I could address that. And are you my ancestor? Is this connection? And the fact that it could come through in such a multiplicity, so many different ways, like I just needed one point of contact. I just needed one thing that I could turn toward, and that ended up opening up into what's like become this huge part of my life. So like there's no like needing to be good at it, and being or being like correct, uh, attempting to like interpret all the signs and signals. And some things are very literal, some are very poetic, and more dreamlike or more metaphor, or maybe it's one piece to a puzzle that started when you were 5 and all other things in your past make sense, or something happens next year and you're like, oh, that's what that was about. So it's not linear necessarily either, and it's a very different way um, of being in the world. And all of a sudden things get richer and bigger, and like I listen to my dreams more, and I notice um, reflections more of the way that my ancestors are present, or that spirit in general is just like present in my life. And it's an ongoing conversation, and so it ends up being something that isn't just contained within these like formalized ritual spaces, or like a session that we might be doing, or like a ritual over a number of days, although those are great places to really kind of like crank up the potency and intensity around us. But like when this becomes like an everyday connection of things I wear on my body and around me, and that I make and that I fill my home with, that they're like living relationships that come into being. And so that piece around like discernment, that's a like that word used to really trip me up, because I'd hear people using that a lot. I'm like, but how do I do this? How do I tell fact from fiction? How do I tell my own projections from some legitimate ancestral contact. And a lot of times you just don't know. And it does take a little bit of time. And you have to learn how to interface. And you have to learn how to like speak one another's language and then soften into that. And like, it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. So it's a relationship that's built. So for example, for myself, in some of those early experiences where I just got a little tingle, or I saw the vague kind of like pattern of the shape of a leaf that I recognized. One of the ways to strengthen that and open up is to take something that maybe you imagined and that you're not sure about, and to take a little bit of a risk. Draw a picture of that thing in your notebook, write about it. I was like, oh, I think that's a nettle leaf. I'll put some nettle tea on my altar that I made. And boom, I had just had all these dreams that night. It was like an ancestor dance party. It was like, Kirra listened. Kirra listened. They were paying attention. And so it's like that. It's like that. It's can sometimes start small, and and uh, that's okay. One thing that I think about with this discernment piece, like the making it up, not making it up piece, is, I'm I'm still I still dance with that, while I'm doing this too. And I dance with the doubt. And sometimes it feels really strong and potent and magical and things are happening. And then other times it's just like normal as normal can be. And there's like nothing going on. Like the waters are still. And those are often the times that I'm like, is this really going on? Like, is this really what it's about? So I feel like there's kind of like there's some rise and fall with the intensity of those kinds of encounters. And that's for me. People are wired different ways. Like some people are living in the intensity of that to such a great degree that they can't regulate enough to like participate in like the basic material goings on of life. And then some people are like also operating in a very narrow range of experience and don't have those like peaks and strange things happening. So it's like being able to like dip in and out of it for me feels like that's a pretty good place to be for where I am in my life right now. But I feel like it's like a quality of experience. Like for me, it's a sense of like, am I driving this story? Like, am I driving the car and I'm deciding where to go next? And like going down the rabbit hole of thought or memory around something that might like pop up for me in a visionary state or a trance state or whatever, doing this kind of ritual with ancestors. Um, or do I feel like I'm a passenger in the vehicle and it's kind of like happening and it's got some momentum of its own? And that's a qualitative difference. It's like if I feel like I'm kind of gripping or driving in any way. And a lot of times things come through for me that I don't understand. Like a good portion of things come through that are too abstract for me to make heads or tail of. And I know that for myself, one of the skills that I've worked on over time is not like gripping to the things that are passing. Sometimes there's a lot of information coming through and I really want to understand a thing and I'm like, and it's getting, but like something else is up and needs to be tended to. And so really kind of letting go of having to figure it all out, or I'm going to miss some stuff, I'm not going to get some stuff's not information for me to understand here, it's something that's happening to me in another way. So um there's some aspect of that that's sort of moving through, but it's also different than kind of like what the goal of meditation might be, around completely clearing the mind and letting your thoughts pass like clouds. This is actually much more engaged. It's like, no, it's a conversation, so you are engaging. It's not letting it all wash over you. It is showing up and engaging. So it's different. It's not like driving the whole story yourself. It's also not being so stepped back that it's all passing you by. There's a level of kind of concentration and participation there's like a sweet spot in there, and it's something that's learnable, and it's something that you can practice and that you can get better at with practice. So I feel like it's like an unused muscle. like we've got it in our body, but maybe you just didn't know how to work it, and then you're like, oh, that works. Oh, okay, I could put some time into it. I could strengthen, um, and so in that way, I think it's possible for so many people to engage, but there does, um, like you were saying, you have to choose to.
And even for myself as a visual artist, it's making things that are there's a difference between what I have made in the past, which is like, oh, that's interesting, I'm going to make that. It's like more based on what I want to do as an idea of a sort of like an individual, uh, than to make things that are ancestral skills and ancestral crafts. The understanding, and when I'm making something and weaving something, say, or stitching something in a specific way that has been passed down for hundreds of generations, the the learning that one gets through the physical movement of the ancestors working through my hands, working
Mm.
through my eyes, through my body, is very different than before, when I was working more sort of as a, like, oh, it's just me on my own. So it's a
Yeah,
beautiful way of also connecting in with the ancestors for me, is through the art practices.
I do see this as is kind of like adult work, um, because it's not just about personal healing. It's not just about getting over my own troubles and like dealing with myself. So it's not navel gazing in that way. It's service work.
Your story of how you got into it through doing kind of direct political action is also interesting, because that is what's also something that drew me to this particular modality, is that it isn't about me as an individual. It's not me, just me and my family. It's actually a lineage healing, and that capacity to do that, and also just the in the work, it's about how to heal things that are, or to explore things that are cultural troubles
Mm-hmm.
and political issues, or and historical issues, and that in itself is also huge. And like you say, it's adult work, but it's also um, something that I think a lot of people want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that can combine with one's own healing and lineage healing as well, like it's kind of amazing.
It's that part of it's fantastic. Like I feel like my capacity to show up, um, as an ally, as a co-conspirator, and to stand with Native folks in the places where I live that are working on issues of environmental justice and sovereignty and land return and all those same things, without like some like crazy unmet hunger in my own heart for connection to culture, and to be able to be like, oh, I have my own songs, and I can stand here and um, I can stand with, and I don't need to stand in front of it. It's like I don't, none of that stuff. There's just like a quieting of, I think, a lot of the things that drive really problematic behavior around cultural appropriation, or like white guilt, and a lot of the stuff that just really gets in the way of being effective, you know, or even like a person who's pleasant to be around. So, not saying that that's perfect, but it's like there's something in me that, like, when I come up against things that really get my heart in my throat, or like fear and shame and all the stuff that can really get in the way of like showing up properly as an ally. It's so helpful to be able to lean on my ancestors to just like settle me down, and to bring it, and to see things like ancestral gifts not just being like, oh, I have this rich dream work or artistic skills or dance or singing or something like that, but like ancestral gifts also include, um, wealth, also include like accumulated wealth. So it's like, okay, now take this money or this property or however it came into my control and do something different with it and break expectations about the way that that gets passed down, So there's opportunities to really um, do things differently.
When we live in these cultures that we don't grow up with necessarily, it's a nuclear family, or just single parent families or whatever it is, and we don't have extended families. We don't necessarily live in communities, or especially in North America where it's very the communities, the cultures are very mixed because it's different people coming to colonize this space, and so having this sense of connection uh, back with a lineage is brings a certain sense of belonging,
Right.
no matter where you are in the world, no matter which part of the land I'm living on. And it also brings me into awareness of that this land has specific ancestors, and I am on this land, and I'm a visitor on this land.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have ancestors from lands that were colonized or had things happen to it and were colonizers. And so
Mm-hmm.
it starts to sort of break down things of like kind of black and white or more sort of fundamentalist ways of looking at things, and sort of realizing that there's a bigger, more nuanced um, way of being in the world and interacting with other people, living people, but also all of the people who are on the other side of the veil, or the dead. So suddenly it expands.
Yeah.
Hard to feel alone.
It is hard to feel alone. It is hard to feel alone. And thanks for that. It is ultimately for ourselves too, because being able to feel that depth of resource and sense of connection and sense of belonging to the earth and like sense of um, being included in lines of fantastic people, being able to turn back around to like serious trouble that my own people have caused, serious trouble that they have experienced, and to help to unwind that in a way that can help me walk forward, not having to drag all of that behind me and to like tear a big hole in the earth as I do, like with all of this crap, it's just like it's not the same. It's not the same as doing like in the material world, like the advocacy and the work and the reparations and the on the ground blood, sweat, and tears that needs to be done. But it makes it possible to do that in an effective and sustainable way. And I feel like there's a piece around this that's like it's like having a festering wound and you keep treating the surface, and it just won't heal. But there's like an old thorn that's way down in there, and you have to like get that out. And if you can move that, then everything else that you do to heal can work. It's not gonna like heal over and then come out. It's not gonna just be this lingering thing. So there's a piece about like going to the root and changing that, like shifting that, which allows all the stuff on the surface, including our material lives that we are part of right now, to just like work better, like the healing that we're attempting in all these other realms to take effect, and like being able to show up in the world with the responsibilities that we have to repair things in a powerful way, and not in this like downtrodden drowning in like shame and guilt and and or going down with the ship of grief, like, it's it is a it is quite a well, it's like having the tools to be able to touch that and handle it and move that, like approach it, face it, but with so much behind you that there's no way that you are gonna um, get washed away by it. So like that's the resilience. That's the resilience, and I feel like that's what's needed. That's the kind of person that I want to be, and that I can reach to others who know how to be that way. Maybe it wasn't my parents, but maybe it was my old ones. And they know a thing or two. The way we talk about this stuff, um, the way different cultures have specific language around afterlife or worldviews that describe the processes or very particular rituals, like um, that there's room for this to be kind of like a bare bones framework about how to rebuild those relationships, and you can layer on your own ways. There's plenty of room for your own ways or multiple ways to be present in this, and just as, like I was saying, that some of the early some of the required steps for being able to do this work is this idea of establishing sovereignty of body and spirit, and being grounded right here on the earth, alive right now. If you can do those things, you are good to go. And there's, we can kind of like coach and help you learn how to do that. But the bar to entry is fairly low as far as that goes. Um, and then, if you do have past work doing some kind of spirit work or some kind of tradition of your own, and you have a history working with plant allies or particular deities, or angels or dragons or something I've never heard of and I know nothing about, there's plenty of room for that. Bring it on. Like if you've got things that you already work with and that you know and that you trust to support you and be a resource for you, bring it. Bring it. It's for you, and I don't have to understand a thing about it, you know. On a personal level, it's like um, I have so much peace with the people in my life, the elders in my life that I have that have died in the time since I've done this work, in advance of their deaths, to know that they're going to be met well, and that they're going to be received and that their transition can be smoothed and eased because of this work being handled, that they're not moving on into turmoil, you know um, and so that is another reason that a lot of people come to this work is, maybe there's somebody in their own family who's nearing death, or maybe they are seeking to bring new ones into the world or have children, and are concerned about family troubles and patterns that they know to be present being passed on and impacting their kids. So, those are common reasons that people seek to do this kind of thing. And I think it does have those kind of further reaching impacts on the living in one's own family, even though there's plenty of people in my own family that I couldn't really talk about this with. It's, we don't have a shared language or understanding or worldview that would allow for that conversation to happen. But in my experience, like the benefits that I've received and and handling things upstream of the living has beneficial impacts on the living, whether or not they know that any of this has gone down, So in that way, I think it's like it is in service to ourselves and to our living family and also to the dead. So, I mean, there's no one left behind in this in this work. I feel pretty good about that.
This work is like for me, it's almost like a Rubik's cube suddenly clicking together and everything's in the right order, because you can suddenly make that you there's a connection with the old ones, with the ancestors, with the the information, like you just what you were talking about, all the different things that that we learn from them. They are the elders, um, and so when we're doing any type of like ritual, even in person, to have that behind us, as well as honoring those that we've just lost, is just a much bigger, richer, bigger and richer experience. Um, and I think that by the more the individuals we do it, just by doing this work, and showing that it is possible, and showing that this is normal, and that we all have the capacity to do it, gives people permission. This is a thing. This is what we used to do, and we've kind of we've as a culture reclaimed some of it through things like death doulaing and like green burial, and trying to be kind of more hands-on with death. But there's also a piece missing, which is this ancestor reverence that goes back further than just, 2 or 3 generations, or the people that you have photographs of into the 1860s.
Hmm. There's things about living in a modern world that our ancestors are not going to really know what to make of. But there's things about how to be a proper human being on the earth that they do. And so, like in lieu of having living elders that I wish I mean, that's something to be angry and to grieve, not having access to those people in my own family, to have been able to sit at the feet of my own grandparents and learn these things. Well, there's other elders. They're just dead. And so being able to go to those ones and learn how to handle things, like there are plenty of things that are not new in terms of human uh, challenges, you know, like even with something as overwhelming as like this climate disaster that we're in right now. We have had human beings who have lived through major climatological shifts on this planet and survived and know a thing or two. And so who better to ask about how to like roll with the times than to talk to those ones, you know? Things like that. Things like that. Like, how do we deal with like the rise of fascism in the West now? Well, it's not the first time that this particular shape and form has reared its ugly head in the world. And so there are those who have learned to survive through those times in the past. Proof is we're still here. So um, those are the ones that I want to go to for advice. um, and really listen, because they made it and there's ways. So yeah, that's another one of the great benefits, is just having that kind of guidance about how to be a proper human being.
What's the difference between this and therapy?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not a therapist, so but my roommate is. Um, um, yeah, this is not like personal. Let's talk about it and work it out. So I don't have a lot of conversation with clients. It's not me talking to them about things going on or trying to understand it or make sense of it. It's about holding space for a ritual, and the conversation is happening between that person and their own ancestors. And so, like, a if a particular bird comes up, if a swan comes up, I'm not going to tell them, oh, a swan means this. You know, you're going to have to sort that out. You're going to have to ask your ancestors what it means to you and your people, or in that particular context, or what your own history and makeup and the material that you bring in, has to do with it. So, so, um, so it's not me as a therapist. I'm not a therapist. I don't know a lot of therapy language, although I've learned some things over time. Um, just kind of like along the way. And I think it's really great to combine this kind of work with other kinds of therapeutic modalities that people are doing for their own healing. So it's great to have like multiple forms of support. So, but that's definitely this is different. This is ritual work. Has to do with prayer. This has to do with singing. This has to do with listening, and it doesn't have to do much with conversation. Well, I will say goodbye at least for the recording, and I hope those of you who are listening to this get a sense of what this work is about, and how we each hold it in our own lives. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me. And are you available for people to reach out at this moment?
Yeah, I am actually. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll leave our respective contact information in an easy place for you to find. And if you're more curious about diving into this yourself, book a consult with one of us. We'll talk to you about it, and we'll see if this is appropriate and right and makes sense for you to do in your own life. Thanks for your time.